Welcome back. Should the President of the United States be untouchable in office and beyond? Well, that's the question the highest court in the land is now being asked to answer. The Supreme Court heard arguments today on former President Donald Trump's immunity claims, something he himself talked about again outside another court of law in Manhattan.
The president has to have immunity. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with a president in the future for 100 years from now. If you don't have immunity, you're not going to do anything. You're going to become a ceremonial president.
But the special counsel in the federal election subversion case says Trump's notion of absolute immunity would upend American democracy. Correspondent Stephanie Liebergen followed along with what Trump's attorneys had to say before the justices.
The Supreme Court is considering whether former President Donald Trump is immune from prosecution. The question stems from a federal case charging him with attempting to overturn the 2020 election results. Trump faces 4 felony counts brought by special counsel Jack Smith, including conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding and defraud the United States. The former president has pleaded not guilty, and his lawyers argue any action he took between the 2020 election and January 6th were all official presidential acts, making him immune from criminal prosecution.
Once we say no criminal liability, Mr. President, you can do whatever you want, I'm worried that we would have a worse problem than the problem of the president feeling constrained to follow the law while he's in office.
I respectfully disagree with that because the regime you've described is the regime we've operated under for 234 years.
The justices tested that claim with hypotheticals.
Let's imagine that he is impeached and convicted for ordering that coup, and let's just accept for the sake of argument your position that that was official conduct. You're saying that he couldn't be prosecuted for that even after conviction in an impeachment proceeding.
There would have to be a statute that made a clear statement that Congress purported to regulate the president's conduct.
The special counsel's team admitted some presidential acts could be protected, but there's no blanket protection from criminal prosecution.
It's baked into the Constitution that any president knows that they are exposed to potential criminal prosecution.
Stephanie Liebergen, Scripps News, Washington.
Lower courts have ruled the former president is now Citizen Trump, and he has the same rights and responsibilities as all Americans. So for context here, we want to bring in Jonathan Nash, a professor of law at Emory University. He's studied Trump's impact on the American judicial system, and his work has been cited by multiple federal appeals courts. So thank you so much for being with us, Jonathan. I want to start with a few of the questions the justices asked and how the former president's attorney responded. Let's listen.
President decides that his rival is a corrupt person and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him. Is that within his official acts that for which he can get immunity?
It would depend on the hypothetical, but we can see that could well be an official act.
It could.
But he ordered the military to stage a coup, and you're saying that's an official act.
I think it would depend.
That's immune.
I think it would depend on the circumstances whether it was an official act.
Okay, so these are hypotheticals, but immunity for ordering rivals killed and staging military coups, how does this fit into our democratic systems here?
Well, I think the best I can say is that you had that excerpt from Justice Jackson earlier about these two competing interests, right? One is the idea that the president is just like any other citizen, subject to the law, including criminal law. And that sort of constrains the president, and that we don't have a king, we don't have a monarch. The other side of it is that you worry, there is a worry, I think a valid worry, that if the president is truly concerned about criminal prosecution, it will constrain his or her actions while in office in unhelpful ways that you wouldn't want the president to be constrained. The military coup example, obviously you had a couple of justices pushing that sort of side of things and emphasizing that by not having, certainly by what former President Trump was claiming, absolute immunity for official acts, you could wind up having presidents do a lot of things. So I think the court's probably going to be wary about going that far.
So I want to ask you, if presidents have immunity, why would Gerald Ford have pardoned President Nixon?
It's a good question, and it actually came up during oral argument. So you could say that I think it's fair to say that this law is unclear. There was a case long after that holding that President Nixon had immunity from civil causes of action, but that was long after the pardon. So the law, even today, is unclear. Back then, it was unclear. You could take the position that President Ford was just making sure that even if the president did not have immunity, the pardon would be appropriate. And there's the idea, relevant to the Trump case, I think, that even President Trump's attorney conceded that sort of non-official acts, private acts, could still subject the president to criminal prosecution. And you could go back and look at the Nixon affairs, and I think some of that you could argue was private. So that's another reason for the pardon there.
And we know that our founding fathers thought through all kinds of scenarios and were very well planned. But obviously, with this law being vague, they didn't quite think this one through. I mean, do you think they ever thought we might be in this position?
I think they hoped we wouldn't be in this position. I think they tried to craft a constitution that would avoid it. This came up, the founders, and sort of what they were thinking during oral argument. And there was mention that there were some states that did have immunity for governors to some degree at the time. So it wasn't like this was a foreign concept. The founders didn't put it in there expressly. And it sort of, to go back to your President Ford question, the question is whether it's baked into the Constitution that there's some amount of immunity, or whether, if you just take the other view, that because it's not there expressly, that it's not there.
So quickly, before we have to go, can you read the tea leaves for us? How do you see the justices ruling?
My sense is, initially, I think people had the sense that President Trump's attorneys were looking for absolute immunity across the board. They conceded that for non-official acts, there shouldn't be immunity. The other side sounds like they conceded that there might be some things, even if they didn't call it immunity, that the president couldn't be prosecuted for. I think the court ultimately is going to come down in the middle and say that there's immunity to some degree. The real question is, will they resolve everything? I think they won't. And if so, they will remand to the lower courts. And that, for President Trump personally, could mean a delay in the prosecution, which could benefit him just because the election is coming up, right?
Absolutely, that timeline. So many people are watching. Law professor Jonathan Nash, we have so much we could have talked to you about, but we only have a short amount of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And a reminder, Trump has been charged with 88 counts across 4 cases, ranging from the hush money trial already underway in Manhattan to alleged mishandling of classified documents in Florida to 2 separate cases over trying to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia and Washington, D.C. And we are following all of this and all of the criminal cases against the former president closely on our new show. It's called Trump on Trial. We'll have updates and analysis on everything that happens in and out of the courtroom Monday through Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, right before this show. We'll be right back.